From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew.
50 basis points it is. The Federal Reserve cuts interest rates by half a percentage point, saying the risks to its employment and inflation goals are in balance.
A narrow majority of policymakers favoring lowering rates by at least another half point this year and another percentage point in 2025. We'll be joined ahead by former White House economic advisor Jennifer Harris on the way forward.
And we'll talk with Haines from Pangaea Policy on the political reaction to the Fed and on the presidential candidates' competing economic plans, with new polling today showing Kamala Harris polling even with Donald Trump in two key swing states. And of course, Joe, part of that has to do with Harris polling better than Biden was on the economy in these states like Pennsylvania and Michigan. If voters are already starting to change their mind on that, how much more could minds change now that interest rates are 50 basis points lower?
Yeah, interesting poll. And boy, it's right down the middle when we start considering the blue wall that's so important for these candidates. Kaylee, Jay Powell delivering a bit of a gift. I think we can say at least the psychological impact of a 50 basis point rate cut could go a ways for voters here. Maybe more than a material impact. But it may also not be our new normal, as the Fed chair made clear today.
I do not think that anyone should look at this and say, oh, this is the new pace. You have to think about it in terms of the base case. Of course, what happens will happen.
Joining us now for more is Michael McKee, Bloomberg's international economics and policy correspondent, who was, of course, in the room when Chairman Powell was giving his news conference this afternoon. So he says 50 isn't the new normal, and yet he does, or at least the dot plot would indicate the Fed thinks they will be cutting 50 more basis points by year end.
By the end of the year, but there are two meetings more before the end of the year, so they could do 25 at each one of those. And, of course, he gave the ritual statement that we are not on a preset path, and if something changes, will change. So it is always possible that they do more or less than 50. But it's next year that's really the focus of the markets. And what they basically timed it out is for one cut each quarter, 25 basis points each quarter, which would bring us down another 100 basis points by the end of 2025. But that's 200 basis points of cutting just to keep the unemployment rate steady.
You talked to the chair about the labor market. There's a thought, of course, that the Fed's too late. And you wanted to get to how sensitive the Fed will be with labor data going forward. How worried should Jay Powell be about the job market?
Well, that's the interesting question, and I don't think they know. The SOM rule, of course, posits that when you get to a certain level of unemployment, it all of a sudden shoots up higher. We hit the SOM level, but we haven't seen unemployment shoot up higher, and the Fed's not forecasting that, but it is always a possibility. Problem for the Fed is that with inflation, they were data dependent. They did not want to cut rates till they had data showing them for sure that they were going to get down close to their 2% target. But with unemployment, you don't know what's going to happen month to month. So does that suggest that they need to be more preemptive? Was what I was trying to get out of him, which he did not give us. He just said we will react to the data as they come in.
Michael, it's great to have you in Washington, as always. Bloomberg's Michael McKee, fresh from the Federal Reserve. Earlier today, Republican vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance had this reaction to the Fed decision.
My reaction is my reaction is a half a point is nothing compared to what American families have been dealing with for the last 3 years. When Donald Trump left office, a lot of Americans were getting 3-4% mortgages. Now they're getting 8% mortgages. A half a point is not going to help those families a whole lot.
And so we turn to the political reaction following the Fed's half-point rate cut, with help from Dallas and Bloomberg Texas bureau chief Julie Fine. Julie, it's great to see you here. Donald Trump has already said at a stop he just made at a Bitcoin bar in New York that this was a political move. What are we hearing from Washington?
Well, in terms of Washington, let's start with the current president, who, of course, is applauding this. And then you look at Vice President Kamala Harris. She actually took today's announcement saying it is a good thing, but that more needs to be done for the American people. So I think on the campaign trail, you're going to continue to hear a lot more of that. Let's look at Elizabeth Warren. She basically said, okay, this is good. It waited too long. This should be a bigger interest rate cut. And then you are hearing from Kevin Cramer much of what you heard from the former president, that this is political. That is his tweet right there. That's what he had to say about it. So I think politicians on both sides of the aisle will continue to spin this, and they'll try to spin this for the voters. One thing I do expect to hear from Republicans, as that Jay Powell also saying today, the influx over the border, well, that has affected unemployment. You can certainly expect to hear Republicans talk about that. You will hear Democrats talk about how they are the party that can take care of the economy and make things better. However, all of this is up to the voters and how it does affect them. So if they're not seeing lower prices, if they're not feeling it, interest rates, well, they need to have it address them, and they needed to address them personally in order to affect the vote.
Well, Julie, those two issues you just mentioned, both the economy and the border, the latest Quinnipiac polling in the blue wall states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, does show Kamala Harris gaining some ground there, actually within 2 points of Donald Trump on the economy in Michigan and Pennsylvania.
Well, certainly it appears that Democrats are in much better place with her at the top of the ticket. If you remember, President Biden was not polling well on that at all. So she is coming closer to the former president there. However, he still does have the lead right now. So it'll be a question of how all of this will affect the voters, what they are going to see in their pocketbook, and what they're hearing and feeling when it does come time for the election, especially in those swing states.
All right, Bloomberg's Julie Fine. Thank you so much. Now, we also want to mention earlier today, the Teamsters Union declined to endorse Donald Trump or Kamala Harris for president. The union's president, Sean O'Brien, released a statement saying, in part, unfortunately, neither major candidate was able to make serious commitments to our union to ensure the interests of working people are always put before big business, adding that we sought commitments from both Trump and Harris not to interfere in critical union campaigns or core Teamsters industries and to honor our members' right to strike, but were unable to secure those pledges. This marks the first time the union has not endorsed a presidential candidate since 1996. And Joe, of course, Donald Trump is calling this a victory for himself today. Not that he got the endorsement. He did not, but because Kamala Harris didn't either.
And the rank and file seem to be leaning in Trump's direction. The House, meantime, set to vote this evening, shortly after we're done here on Balance of Power, on a 6-month continuing resolution on government funding with the so-called SAVE Act attached. It is expected to fail, with the deadline to avert a government shutdown now less than 2 weeks off. House Speaker Mike Johnson had this to say about it earlier today.
So here we are at the fiscal cliff at the end of the fiscal year. September 30th is right upon us. We don't have two sets of bills, as is supposed to be the system, for the House and Senate to go and negotiate together, because the Senate brings nothing to the table. So it is the Senate that has put us in a situation to have a CR to not shut the government down.
Joining us now is Mike Dorning, who helps to lead Bloomberg's congressional coverage, and no stranger to countdowns to shutdowns. Mike, I don't think you see one coming here, but
I do not.
Mike Johnson knows that the Senate is going to jam the House, as they say, as soon as this bill fails, right?
Well, jam the House, but this is what most people in the House really want in the end anyway. No one who's running for re-election wants to run for re-election where they've shut down the government, basically, except for people in very safe seats that they know they're not going to lose. So there will be overwhelming pressure to kick the can down the road until after the election.
But what about the pressure coming from someone who's trying to win the presidential election? Former President Trump on True Social this afternoon says, and this is a quote, if Republicans don't get the SAVE Act and every ounce of it, they should not agree to a continuing resolution in any way, shape, or form. Is he going to pressure Republicans to shut the government down?
It's a question of how much he would pressure them on that. It certainly serves Trump's own personal interests in his presidential campaign to have a fight over these election questions and something that can focus the conversation on immigration or illegal immigration in any way, shape, or form and make that the issue going into October. That said, shutting down the government, or particularly an extended government shutdown, creates risks for him, too, because they would probably be blamed on Republicans. There is no reason why sitting House Republican members of Congress who actually face a competitive election want to have a shutdown. So at the end of the day, I would bet, and I would certainly think the risk of a shutdown is very low before the election.
Less than 2 weeks to figure it out. Bloomberg's Mike Dorning. We thank you, as always.
That's a long time in Congress.
It is. It's an eternity. Coming up on Balance of Power, a closer look at the Fed's rate cut decision with Jennifer Harris, the former senior director for the National Security Council and National Economic Council. It's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
There's been quite an influx across the borders, and that has actually been one of the things that's allowed unemployment rate to rise. And the other thing is just the slower hiring rate, which is something we also watch carefully.
Fed Chair Jay Powell earlier in his news conference today following the meeting and the announcement talking about the effects of the rise in immigration on unemployment. Joining us now is Jennifer Harris, international economist, former senior director for both the National Security Council and the National Economic Council. It's great to have you with us here, Jennifer. I wonder your thoughts on the job market after what we heard today from the Fed chair, who had said weeks ago that the job market was in balance. There is a thought, however, that the Fed is late. The job market is weakening more quickly than some anticipated. He made clear to Bloomberg today that he would be sensitive moving forward. But is the Fed too late?
Better late than never. I was certainly in the camp that wanted to see a cut, in July, and thought that the underlying fundamentals, both on the inflation side and, as you say, and the kind of clear softening of the job market that we've really seen since January, February of this year, both of those things warranted a cut in July. They didn't get there, but I do think that they have somewhat made up for that in getting to 50 for this cut, and I do. And with 50 now out of the gate in September, I am pretty comfortable that we have nailed the soft landing and we won't see anything akin to a recession, at least in the way most of us experience it.
Well, Jennifer, there is still the remaining question of how quickly a 50 basis point cut actually kicks in. If there's already softening taking shape in the labor market, what the lagged effect is on the easing side versus on the tightening side as we've been experiencing, especially given the narrative around the timing of this so close to a presidential election. Will the effects actually have been felt by November 5th, really?
I think that's a great question, and I doubt it. I think that's one reason why we shouldn't make too much of the political implications of this cut. I think the Fed is doing its job. Again, I wish they would have come to a different place in July. I think had they done that, we would be in a position to start feeling some of those effects, now. But rather than relitigating history, I do think it's important to sort of see what kind of hiring expectations we can get priced in today. I think this will be welcome news. And again, I think that the main point is to avoid an outright recession. My guess is that the expectations, everyone knew it would either be July or September. And I think that has put a floor a little bit under the labor market. Mm-hmm. And not for nothing, I think a lot of the public investments and the overall strength of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's economy and their economic agenda have done the lion's share of the work and deserve the bulk of the credit for helping us land this soft landing that we seem to have found our way to.
Well, yeah, you say we nailed the soft landing. Jay Powell was asked today, Jennifer, about whether he can declare victory or when he might over inflation. And he said, as part of his answer, we need to be not only at 2%, but we need to be at 2% for some time. How long is some time?
Yeah, we've been at 2% for some time. If you take out housing, we've been, right around the Fed's 2% inflation target for about a year. We have, for the last year, we haven't had an inflation problem. We've had a housing problem, and we continue to have a housing problem. I think that's why it's really important that you see Kamala Harris zero in on exactly that out of the gate and laying out her economic agenda. But we need to do more. And in particular, I think we need to understand that housing is but one of actually several inflationary factors that are really coming from the supply side. So I think Houthi rebels droning maritime choke points. I think more climate change-induced crop failures, more higher risks of pandemics. All of these things, I think, are inflationary, and they're not going anywhere anytime soon. And I'm not at all sure that interest rates are the best tool to tackle them. I think we need to get much more foot forward looking at creative uses of buffer stocks for some of those known inflationary culprits. Need to get much more foot forward in a set of supply chain resilience moves that can insulate us from similar pandemics or a whole lot of the brittleness in supply chains writ large, because these are really going to be the drivers of inflation as I see it across in the medium to longer term, the next decade or so. In addition to housing, we need to build more. Kamala Harris is zeroed in on that. And I think the Fed helped us tremendously today by beginning to lower interest rates, probably the single largest headwind to building more housing.
Well, Jennifer, on one of the points you made about Houthi rebels in the Middle East, and that raises questions not just necessarily about the medium to long term over the next 10 years, as you suggested, but perhaps the even more immediate term, is we're watching what's happening in Lebanon with the explosion of Hezbollah devices, walkie-talkies and pagers in the last few days, questions around escalation in the Middle East. How big of a potential inflation risk could that be if we see conflict erupting in a more material fashion than just between Israel and Hamas?
I think it's real. I think the largest conduit for that kind of inflation would be fossil energy prices, oil and gas prices. And that is why, I have been out early and often arguing vociferously for the Fed to actually work with the fiscal policy that they have been calling on to move for most of my professional lifetime. You've seen the Fed say some version of, we've exhausted all of the kind of creative arts and bullets in our chamber. We now need fiscal policy to move. Well, guess what? It has moved. You don't get to pick your political windows in Washington, and this is the 10-year investment horizon that we have. We've seen an investment multiplier on the IRA something around 6 to 7 to 1. Well, these public investments are going gangbusters in their ability to crowd in private investment. That I think in the relatively near term, medium term, talking years not decades, we could be in a position to sever precisely that inflationary channel from oil and gas for good. So we wouldn't have to worry about at least the economic contagion and inflationary consequences of some of these hostilities in the Middle East. There's plenty of else to worry about in a lot of the tragedy that we see in that region. But at least the kind of inflation that we could feel at home would be one less thing to worry about.
Sounds like a good time to refill the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, doesn't it, Jennifer?
Yeah, and I think that is, it's among the catechisms that I think you've seen Joe Biden kind of break with in terms of market orthodoxies or Washington telling you how things are done. I remember writing a paper at a certain unnamed think tank for literally years because I was arguing now that the U.S. was a net exporter of oil and gas to begin to use the SPR to control for price in just the way that you've seen Joe Biden do, and it was just not done. And essentially had to edit that part out of this paper. It wasn't done until it was. This makes clear sense because of the broad-based vulnerability the U.S. middle class still has to oil and gas prices, and it's just the volatility, the kind of price chop of oil, and it's is not helpful for the U.S. economy. So the use of the SPR to shave that down to create a predictable glide path that I think is really important for this transition to cleaner energy is the kind of fresh thinking that I think we have really benefited from. And I think the state of this very strong state of the economy right now is a testament to that. It's not fashionable to talk about, but when you really pan back now that I think the Fed has signaled their clear watchfulness stallness over the labor market, I think it allows us to kind of step back and just see how strong across the board, from growth to record highs in equities, to record corporate profits, to record real wage gains in the middle class. There's a whole lot to like about this economy, and I think it's a direct testament to the economic policies you've put in place by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for the last 4 years.
All right, Jennifer Harris, thank you so much for joining us. Let's talk again soon. Now, coming up, a second wave of exploding devices, as we mentioned, in Lebanon, electronic devices specifically. We'll have an update on the state of play next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. We saw another wave of exploding devices in Lebanon today. This time, walkie-talkies, after blasts from pagers yesterday injured thousands, and 26 people in total have now been killed. So for more on what is happening and how it could escalate the situation in the Middle East, joining us now is Bloomberg's Michael Shepard. So obviously, this is low-tech technology we're talking about, walkie-talkies and pagers. It brings us back to decades ago, and yet it could be very disruptive for Hezbollah.
It's really striking how whoever was responsible for this attack, and the Lebanese are blaming Israel Security Service, Mossad. Israel, of course, is saying nothing about it whatsoever, very characteristically. But what is striking is that they had gone after efforts by Hezbollah to evade detection by going low-tech. Rather than using a smartphone like the one that we all carry in our pockets, they were going to things that we had kind of passed on, 20 years ago or more. I remember having a
I myself
pager.
Have never used a pager.
I remember having a pager 25 years ago, but it was a way for them to maybe avoid being caught. But somehow, whoever was responsible was able to penetrate the supply or transportation chain, train, or both, to get these into Hezbollah fighters' hands.
There was nothing like getting a 911 on your pager back then, right, Michael? That was, you stop what you're doing. Right. So remarkable reporting, just incredible journalism in the past 24 hours since this first broke, to find the Mossad spy agency planted explosives inside 5,000 pagers. Looks like it went through a plant in Budapest. This is something Israel must have been years ahead on, right?
Well, that is the leading theory. And the trail actually started in Lebanon, but then went to Taiwan, because that is the base of the company whose brand appeared on the devices that exploded, the pagers that showed up yesterday. And the head of this company, called Gold Apollo, said, we had nothing to do with this. We don't know what this is. But 2 years ago, a company called BAC Consulting came to us asking to produce a certain model of our pagers under license. And we said, sure. And they did that. And the trail now leads to this company, which seems to be going cold.
Wow. Israel has not claimed responsibility for this, to be clear.
No, they have not, to be clear.
Bloomberg's Michael Shepard. Thank you so much, Shep, for the time here. Coming up, a closer look at each of the candidates' economic proposals. Terry Haines, Pangaea Policy, up next on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is my fourth presidential election at the Fed, and it's always the same. We're always going into this meeting in particular and asking what's the right thing to do for the people we serve, and we do that, and we make a decision as a group, and then we announce it. And that's always what it is. It's never about anything else. Nothing else is discussed. People have found over time that insulating the central bank from direct control by political authorities avoids making monetary policy in a way that favors maybe people who are in office as opposed to people who are not in office. We do our work to serve all Americans.
Fed Chair Jerome Powell on staying out of politics when making decisions on rate cuts, but former President Donald Trump might beg to differ on whether or not their rate cut today was political. He said this afternoon in New York.
I guess it shows the economy is very bad to cut it by that much. Assuming they're not just playing politics, the economy would be very bad, or they're playing politics, one or the other. But it was a big cut.
Mr. President, any reaction to the Teamsters?
Joining us now for a closer look on the impact of today's Fed decision on this election is Terry Haines, Pangaea Policy Founder. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and Radio, Terry. So he says it's either a soft economy or this is political. Do either of those messages resonate with voters, or are they just going to be excited about lower interest rates?
I think the people that are already firmly in Trump's favor will take that on board. I don't think anybody else will. I don't think it's a message that's designed to get any more votes, firstly. Secondly, it doesn't have a whole lot to do with reality. You know, there have been times when the Fed has been politicized, and historically. And this Fed has not. And in fact, the great demonstration of this Fed's lack of politicization is when the vast majority of them were confirmed in 2022, because the people that nominated them and confirmed them, Biden and the Democratic majority Senate, wanted more dovish policy. And the moment they were all confirmed, they went off on this hawkish course that appears to have tamed inflation. So, you know, from recent history, this group has already proved, in my mind, that they're not politicized, and they'll continue not to be, I think.
Well, Terry, I hate to go dark on you here, but you started it Sunday with a note to clients with the headline, "Three Shadows Over Fed Rates." One of them you describe as the lowest U.S. political will to deal with the unsustainable trajectory of fiscal debt deficit, which now has the U.S. spending more on debt service than on defense, imperiling the U.S. ability to defend itself. It brings us, of course, to the argument over government funding right now as we deal with funding the Pentagon in a potential 6-month stopgap, something that certainly budget hawks, military hawks don't want to deal with. But this is the story, right, that we're not hearing any service to on the campaign trail, and that this Congress is not prepared to deal with.
Well, right. I mean, you don't hear that you don't hear it in markets. You don't really. I mean, you know, the markets have been nothing but 25 or 50 over the last week. And right. Meanwhile, what you don't see is anything dealing with geopolitical situation. I mean, I don't have to remind everybody about that, but, you know, we've got at least 3 hotspots globally, and more are you know, bubbling under the surface. So you've got that, and you've got this whole fiscal debt and deficit issue that markets are increasingly restive about. The United States probably gets a pass only because the economy here is so much better than the economies elsewhere in the world, whether you look at China, the EU, the UK, for example. So, you know, even in utopia, there's myopia, and there's a lot of myopia going around here. And that leaches into the, and that leaches into the campaigns. They don't think they have to talk about it either.
Yeah, well, what they want to talk about instead is not the deficit, but just taxes and rebates and credits for everyone, it seems. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have both been putting a few new things out there this week. Just take a listen, Terry.
Those jobs that we created, and I want people to pay fair taxes and all of that, but she's going to be raising your taxes to 50, 60, 70%. And it's not sustainable.
My plan is that no family, no working family should pay more than 7% of their income in child care. Allowing people to pursue their dreams in terms of how they want to work, where they want to work, benefits us all. It strengthens the entire economy.
And of course, Terry, that doesn't include tape of Donald Trump talking about the SALT cap potentially going away. He truthed about it yesterday. We expect him to talk about that when he rallies in Long Island this evening. How are we realistically going to pay for any of this, or is that just not part of the plan?
That's not part of the plan, but then again, we're in the promise everything, the Price is Right phase of all of this. But, you know, and it's only when you understand what the mix post-election, what the mix of president plus Congress politically might be, is before you get to the art of the doable, the art of the possible. But the vast majority of this is pandering to get votes, and I love juxtaposing, as you just did, Trump's complaints about Harris and taxation with SALT, which, as you know, because I saw you talking about this morning, was a $1.2 trillion over 10-year matter for the tax bill. So in 2017, so. none of this is sustainable. None of this shows the care or the interest in actually talking about debt or deficit. But then there are no votes in that either.
One of the other shadows you point to, the highest geopolitical risk in over 50 years, Terry. During the White House briefing today, we heard from John Kirby, the White House National Security Communications Advisor, had this to say about this whole pager and walkie-talkie exploding pager incident that we saw in Lebanon. Let's listen.
I'm just not going to get into intelligence assessments one way or another about this. And I would also add that, as we have said from the very beginning, Israel has a right to defend itself. How they do so matters to us. And we don't shy away from having those kinds of conversations with the Israelis as appropriate.
So you're saying Israel is behind these operations?
I did not say that.
Terry, as we consider this story, which is still developing, we could have another day of this for all we know. Add on Ukraine, the South China Sea, as you mentioned. Talk to us about market risk for the rest of this year based on geopolitics.
Well, this is a huge shadow that over the markets, and has been for quite a while. Markets ignore it, but the moment that one of these or more than one of these hotspots breaks out into something, whether it be something catastrophic, whether it be nuclear, the use of nuclear arms in Russia, or an attack on Ukrainian nuclear facilities by Russia. The idea that they don't want to countenance drones anymore. The threat of Ukraine using NATO-provided missiles. South China Sea and the Philippines particularly have been a standoff for quite some time. Everybody knows about the Middle East, and that keeps ratcheting up. It's not going to take much for markets to pull back very sharply and very quickly when any of those goes over, and it's quite a bet that the markets make today in assuming they won't, because on the ground, diplomatically and politically in Washington, nobody's assuming that.
Even in utopia, you have myopia. Great conversation, as always. Terry Haines, welcome back, Pangaea Policy Founder. We thank you, as always, for being with us on Bloomberg. Coming up, what's next on the campaign trail as Donald Trump holds a rally on Long Island, New York, of all places. And Kamala Harris addressing the Congressional Hispanic Caucus today. We'll assemble our political panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I'll say this for Michigan. If I don't win, you will have no auto industry within 2 to 3 years. It'll all be gone. You will not have any manufacturing plants. China's going to take over all of your business because of the electric car. You will not have a car industry left, not even a little bit of a car industry.
Donald Trump during a town hall as it was billed in Flint, Michigan last night, talking about what he sees as the future or lack thereof of the car industry, depending on who wins the election. Joining us now, our political panel. Glad to say Ashley Davis is back, former Homeland Security official and Republican strategist, alongside Jim Kessler, co-founder, executive vice president of policy at Third Way. It's great to see both of you here, and fascinating to see the economy looming large at this stage of the campaign. We're all meeting together on a Fed day when this is obviously something that's kind of creeping into mainstream coverage. Donald Trump's weighing in, Kamala Harris is weighing in. We have new polling out of the swing states today that's quite remarkable. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. We'll start with the first two. Pennsylvania and Michigan, Ashley. You're seeing Kamala Harris catch up with, within the margin, Donald Trump, specifically on the issue of the economy. The timing here is remarkable. What does Donald Trump need to do to bring focus back to his agenda?
Well, I actually think the campaign in regards to the economy is baked, because there's, even with what happened today with the interest rates and everything else, I think that it's a done deal. I mean, nothing's going to change at the grocery stores, nothing's going to change at the gas tank between now and plus all the early voting. So I think it's a good talking. I mean, listen, the economy's swinging back, and I'm not going to take that away from the Biden administration. I'm not going to take it away from her. But if you still are paying so much for groceries, if you're still paying so much for insurance, it's still going to be an issue for you, and that's not going away. So I don't know if that issue matters. But in regards to the polling in Pennsylvania, I mean, I was at a briefing today for Pennsylvania because I'm a Pennsylvania girl, and like those polls go everywhere. I mean, I understand. Like today, I think she was up 6 points in the poll
overall. Yeah.
But like if you look at I looked at internal polling today, and McCormick's down 4, and they're between 1%. But who knows? I mean, who knows? And I look at my part of Pennsylvania, which is central and western part, the Alabama, part of Pennsylvania.
Thank you, James Carville.
Yes, exactly. And you have to have 80% to offset. 80% in those counties to offset the Philadelphia counties, which suburban women, which I think Trump has a huge problem with. And if they come out in strides, that's going to be his problem. Well,
okay,
I told you I'm a Democrat. Like talking point sometimes.
Well, okay, so here's the actual Democrat, technically.
What kind of panel is this?
What are your thoughts on what we just heard from Ashley? Also, the idea that the economy is fully baked, because we made a big deal today about a 50 basis point rate cut potentially changing the mind of a voter.
So I do think it matters. I'm from the other half of Pennsylvania. Look, Kamala Harris had 3 tasks once she got the nomination, and that was to show voters that she was in the center on the economy, on the border, and on crime. And she's done a great job on all of those things. And on the economy, she has unveiled, the opportunity economy, which is a very centrist framing of the economy. And she's put out, middle-class tax ideas and other very pro-market ideas. And I think she is convincing voters who are just getting to know her, okay, she might be right in the center on the economy. Then you add, what the Fed did today. You're starting to feel that all the bad news about the economy is in the rearview mirror. And then you get to pay attention a little bit more to the good news. And you see in polling in those swing states, but also everywhere, like there's been a kind of a steady gain for Harris over the last 3 or 4 weeks, including with the debate. And I still don't think she's ahead at this point. I still think Donald Trump
nationally or in Pennsylvania?
I think in general. I think in the Electoral College. Yeah. Okay. I do not think Kamala Harris is winning right now. I think she is close to that 270 number, but I don't think she's there right now.
Is Donald Trump still winning the who's better off 4 years ago question?
Yes, but I think I agree with you in regards to she's said different policies that are better, but I just don't know how people believe her. And I'm not saying I don't one way or the other, but how do people believe her that crime's going to be better, the border's going to be better, the economy's going to be better, because she was actually part of this administration for the last 4 years. And I don't know, and you don't know, and none of us know what people believe a vice president really has hanging around their neck, right? And so I think he wins the argument, but he doesn't say the argument, which is kind of the issue. I mean, there were so many soft layups at the debate. I'm the opposite of that. The debate was skewed one way or the other, because I think there were a lot of soft layups that he could have come back at that he didn't, and say why obviously the border's the number 1 or number 2 issue. Like, why didn't he hit it on it, or the economy? And so, anyway, I think he just needs to get his talking points better, but I don't know if that's ever going to happen.
Well, as you raise this notion of believing Kamala Harris on various issues, I also have the question on belief from unions that she will be as pro-union as Joe Biden, because today the Teamsters Union, for the first time since 1996, decided not to endorse. Yes, they didn't endorse Trump, but they didn't endorse her either, when pretty much every major union has at this point, Jim. How big a hit is that?
Yeah, so I think the endorsement makes news. I don't think the endorsement does anything with votes, because if you look at how Democrats are doing with a lot of the union workers that are like Teamsters and some of the other industrial unions, they've been getting the endorsements but not the votes of the members. So
yeah, the Teamsters survey predominantly favored Trump.
Right.
2-1.
Right. And again, that was a survey. That wasn't really the vote. Again, that's more like a poll. Yeah. But look, if you look at where Harris is doing well compared to Biden, it is with voters of color, it's with suburban women, and it's with younger voters. And if you look at where she's not doing as well as Joe Biden, it's with older white men. And if she can pull up just a little bit with older white men, it's over. She wins.
You don't want those 1.3 million Teamsters members work in the
do.
ground for you?
You absolutely do.
So they're sitting on their hands in this campaign.
But if, let's say she got the Teamsters endorsement, I'm not so sure how much work they're going to do anyway. Like, the vote's going to be the vote, okay?
Can I just, step in for 1 second? So, because if you look at different polls, she's down 4% with people of color and brown and black voters compared to Biden from 2020. So, I mean, again, I don't believe all polls. I stopped believing in polls like a long time ago. But since when Eric Cantor lost, does anyone remember that?
Yes.
He was up 16 points. But I just don't know. She's still behind with those voters, which is why she's spending today with a Hispanic voter, Hispanic organizations and everything else. So I don't think she's quite there yet.
Clearly, that's true if you look at Joe Biden's 2020 numbers.
Yeah.
But I've been hearing for the last 32 years in election cycles, Democrats aren't going to do as well with black voters as they did in the past. And then when the election actually comes, the numbers go up. She's doing better than Joe Biden in his polling of this year.
Okay. Well,
but not yet to that 2020 level, but no one would be at this point.
Well, and of course she said when she spoke with the NABJ yesterday that she is not taking the vote specifically of black men for granted, and she thinks she has to work for it. All right, Jim and Ashley are going to stick with us. We got to talk about Shutdown Watch on Capitol Hill, so that's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
There's another election interference effort the Republicans are fighting right now, and that is to make sure that non-citizens are not allowed to vote in the election. And that is why we're bringing the SAVE Act again to the floor today. We're attaching it to the continuing resolution. Why are we doing that? It's very simple. Congress has two very important assignments right now, immediately to be done. One is to make sure the government is funded, and the second is to make sure our elections are secure.
That was House Speaker Mike Johnson earlier today on why he is attaching the SAVE Act to the government funding bill. It's scheduled for a vote within the next hour in the House and is expected to fail. Still with us, our political panel, Ashley Davis and Jim Kessler. So he's talking there about securing elections. Ashley, Donald Trump chimes in on True Social this afternoon to say Republicans should not accept a CR of any kind, of any duration, if the SAVE Act is not attached, knowing the Senate's not going to go for that. Are they going to shut down?
No, they're not going to shut down, and that's a huge just PR disaster for Republicans in the House and Senate. But what I've been saying for weeks, and I'm sure you agree, what's going to happen is, Schumer's probably going to put some sort of package forward next week, and then the House, and then leave, and it's going to be a straight extension through mid-December. And the House is going to have to take it, and they'll do all these votes, and it's going to have the same
It's almost
result.
like you've seen this happen before.
Like
it's
400 times.
Oh, even just this year alone, you mean. So your former boss is going to jam the House. We keep hearing this is what happens every 3 months. Is he just sitting back kind of smirking, getting ready to do this again?
Yes.
Does it end that way? All right.
Yes, it does. And just Schumer has a good relationship with Mike Johnson, actually. They bonded over sort of the last shenanigans that's going on.
Yeah.
Schumer believes that Mike Johnson is a person of integrity and good intentions who's diametrically opposed to what Schumer believes in a lot of policy areas, and thinks that in the end he'll do the right thing. I know Schumer was saying that about Ukraine at the time when that was one of the stumbling blocks. But we're going to have to go through this shenanigans and drama for no real reason, but we're just going to have to go through it.
And this is, I'm sorry, this is just such inside baseball because Schumer knows what he's up against, but he's an honest broker from what I understand. I don't know him that well, but the difference between him and McCarthy, from what I understand, is that he's going to say, I have to put this vote up, so I'm going to, and if the Senate needs to start their process to get an extension, got it.
Well, is this just for Trump? Is this for an audience of one?
No, I think this is like the 15 people. 100 Republicans don't vote for
any CR.
That's right.
Any CR. So, and then the more that Democrats bail them out, the less people have to.
Mm-hmm.
Just quickly, if it's Schumer's call, we're doing this fight again in December, right? We're not waiting until March.
I think it'll be December.
So a shorter term.
Yes.
CR.
there's like December 13th, or there's a Friday, I forget the date, that's before, and then they have a week before Christmas.
So try to not ruin the holidays.
Pentagon hawks might actually sign off on that, right?
Right, well, that's the
Shorter
concern.
duration. We'll find out together.
We may all be here.
Yeah, well, stick around because the vote is following this program, right? Popular Corn, and thanks to our political panel this evening. Ashley Davis, Jim Kessler with us on Balance of Power. Remember to check out the Washington Edition newsletter. It's on the terminal and online. We're going to have a newsy night.
Indeed we will, and we'll have coverage of it for you tomorrow. So we'll see you then on Bloomberg TV and radio.